Let's do a thought experiment. Let's go back to ancient Rome and spend a day watching the games at the Colosseum. And since nothing in this life is free, how much would it cost us? How many coins, how many denarii, asses, or sestertii should we take with us in our time machine to properly enjoy our day? Let's look into ancient sources and try to figure out how much would things like buying a ticket, buying food, placing a bet on a gladiator, getting ourselves a souvenir, spending a day enjoying ourselves around the Colosseum. How much would a Roman spend on a day out at the games? Let's get right into it. The first thing we need to decide is when are we being transported to? Archaeological and literary evidence for the specific price of things is surprisingly scarce, and we need to take into account when was the price for something recorded. The price of, let's say, a pair of sandals during the late Republican period was different to its price in the, let's say, 3rd century AD. We need to take into account things such as inflation and the overall state of the Roman economy at a certain time period. They didn't even use the same types of coins depending on which time periods you're comparing. Wars and economic crises could make something worth multiple times what it would cost during peacetime. It was a very fragile economy if compared to modern standards. So we need to focus on some relatively short, relatively prosperous time period. Fortunately, we have plenty of price records from the 1st and 2nd centuries AD. That's when the empire was at its most stable. Prices were somewhat constant, at least for ancient standards, and we have time capsules such as Pompeii and Herculaneum, which were buried in 75 AD when Mount Vesuvius exploded, preserving plenty of inscriptions and records for prices of everyday items, which we will be mostly using as a reference today. This was also a time of very intense literary production, so lots of texts from that time have reached our days, and we can scavenge bits of price information from different texts. That's why I decided to pick the year 90 AD for us to travel to. Basically, okay, Domitian is emperor. Despite contemporary sources saying he was an absolute bastard, the economy was doing very well at that time. The Colosseum was just 10 years old, so it's still brand new, and we have enough evidence for an educated guess on prices. Okay, we're in Rome. The first thing we need to do is to get inside the Colosseum, and here's where we have one of our first surprises of the day. No ticket booths. There's nowhere we can buy an entry ticket. Entry tickets existed. They were small lead or clay tokens called tessera. But these were not sold. They were given away, thrown into the crowd by the emperor, distributed amongst the powerful of Rome, and then given by these powerful people down the social ladder to their subordinates and friends. Some were given to the different trade associations that existed in the city. So if you were, let's say, part of an important guild of artisans, it's likely there were a few tessera given to your association, and these were distributed to its members. That means you had to know someone influential enough for them to have access to tickets to spare, and for them to be willing to give you one. According to conservative estimates, the Colosseum could hold up to 50,000 people. Let's remember, at that time, Rome was a metropolis of around 1 million people, maybe even more, so tickets were in very high demand, always. But hey, let's, for the sake of simplicity, imagine you managed to call the attention of a relatively wealthy merchant with your weird Latin accent and your odd foreigner appearance. And he's willing to take you as a guest with him to watch the games. The area of the Colosseum where you would sit depended on your social class, with the emperor and the senatorial class sitting at the lower levels, right next to the arena with the best views of the action, and the higher up you sat, the lower your social status was, and of course the less you could see and sitting was less comfortable. Fortunately, your patron is very generous with you, and you both are sitting at the Menianum Secundum, reserved for richer plebeians, which still had a reasonably good view of the arena. He hands you a tessera. On it, there are 3 inscriptions that indicated the location of your seat. The cuneus, the sector of the Colosseum where you would sit, the gradus, the row number, and the locus, your individual designated seat. It's actually incredible. It's just like what you would find at a modern stadium at your ticket. Alright, that's good. We're saving money already. You entered the Colosseum and you haven't spent any money. All you had to do was to win the favor of a citizen. So you join your new friend and you both take your seats. When games were held, they were loudly advertised all over the city. The gladiatorial matches were obviously the main attraction of the day, and it was the perfect opportunity for Romans to indulge into another of their favorite pastimes, gambling. There were many laws putting restrictions on gambling, and they were widely ignored by the population. Interestingly, however, an exception was made to sporting events. People could bet on anything related to a competition of strength or skill. The laws imposing restrictions seem to have been focused on pure luck-based gambling. Low-level, casual betting on who would win a gladiatorial fight was incredibly common amongst friends. Something like putting a sestertius or a dupondius on the line, some small sums of money to make the experience a bit more interesting. Your patron, your friend, as any good Roman, loves some betting, and he invites you to put an entire silver denarius on the line. It's your first time at the Colosseum, and he wants it to be a memorable experience. Now, a denarius was a significant sum of money, 16 asses, a bold bet to spice up the experience. And you begrudgingly agreed to bet it, since if it wasn't for him, you wouldn't even have been able to get in. Let's consider this denarius to be lost. He probably knows which gladiators are the best, while you have no idea what you're doing. Next, how about food and drink? Spending a day at the Colosseum wasn't just about the gladiatorial fights. If you wanted, you could expect to spend nearly the entire day there. A typical day started with an initial opening parade, presenting the sponsors of the event and a preview of everything the crowd would expect to enjoy. It generally started with animal hunts in the morning. These were called venatio. Then there was a midday break when prisoners would be executed. This could be a normal execution or a damnatio ad bestias, where they would be put to death by being mauled by some exotic, fierce animal like a lion or a rhino. There could also be theatrical plays, and the very last attraction in the afternoon would be the high point of the day, the gladiatorial matches. It was one long spectacle that lasted from morning to late in the afternoon. And since you didn't bring anything to eat or drink in your time capsule, you're going to have to buy something. When excavating the sewers under the Colosseum, all kinds of food remains were found, including bones of animals, chickens, pigs, goats, and seeds of all kinds. Olives, of course, we're talking about the Mediterranean, figs, melons, nuts, bread was probably also widely available, and shards of ceramic cups indicate wine was widely consumed. As an alternative to wine, a series of water reservoirs and fountains could be found at the first 3 levels, which was made possible by some pretty advanced plumbing infrastructure. It would have been dangerous, of course, to shove 50,000 people at a stadium on a hot sunny day without some way of getting them to cool down and hydrate, so water was free and it was easily available. Now, how much would it cost us to grab a meal? We know that spectators ate at the Colosseum, and now we need to get an idea of prices. As I mentioned, inscriptions at Pompeii and Herculaneum, as well as literary evidence, give us a list of options. I've looked through them and picked a menu for us. To drink, we're having a sextarius of ordinary wine. That's a bit over half a liter, or 19 ounces for our American viewers. At a surprising 1 as for a sextarius of the cheapest wine, it shows wine was actually remarkably affordable. I mean, it's half a liter. Just don't expect it to taste great. We're talking about the cheapest variety after all. And the Romans used to water down their wine. Next, we're getting some bread. It's the staple of the Roman diet. So we're buying 1 pound loaf of high quality bread for 2 asses. We need to add something to that dry bread, so we're buying some pork meat. Beef or fish were also available, but they were considerably more expensive. Half a pound of pork should set us back another 2 asses. Finally, we should add some pulmentarium to our bread. The term pulmentarium refers to a lot of different recipes of different kinds of porridges, pastes, basically anything you would put on top of a bread to give it a little bit of flavor. A famous variety was made out of beets, leeks, and garum, a fish sauce the Romans enjoyed. Sounds like a pretty interesting mix of flavors to me. A small serving of pulmentarium to add to our bread should set us back 1 as. So, the wine, the bread, pork, and the pulmentarium add up to a total of 6 asses. However, let's keep in mind these prices come mostly from records and inscriptions on taverns, a place where people were supposed to find relatively cheap food that they didn't need to cook themselves. However, if you've ever been to any sports event, you know the price for any snack is outrageous, and it's reasonable to believe whoever sold food at the Colosseum would charge an extra for the convenience. There might have been some sort of entry fee for vendors or a kickback they had to pay in order to be allowed to get in and sell their food during the games. Here's where I'm forced to take a wild guess. Let's add a 100% surcharge. This brings the price of our food and wine from 6 to a surprisingly expensive 12 asses. Okay, you won't stay glued to your seat for hours and hours. There were intermissions. You could leave and come back in as long as you kept your tessera. The lower corridors of the Colosseum next to its entrance are surprisingly spacious. If you ever have the chance to visit the Colosseum, the moment you enter it, you will see those big columns and huge arches. These are called fornix, and they let lots of exterior light in. It's a pretty fantastic piece of engineering. So this area had small pop-up shops. People probably sold food and drink there as well. Maybe they even sold souvenirs. There's a surprising number of Roman clay lamps that survived to our days. For many, this was their main source of light during the night. These were mass-produced, from very plain ones that sold for a single as to richly decorated lamps, with some depicting gladiators. I wonder if these were sold at the Colosseum as souvenirs. If you want to take one home with you as a gift, these would have probably cost you twice as much, so 2 asses, more expensive than a plain one. Now, one of the most popular businesses conducted under these arches was, prostitution. Remember, the name of the arches was fornix, right? Well, the people who sold their sexual services under the arches were called fornicaria or fornicatrix, and fornicarius for the male counterpart. The word is still present in many of our modern languages, nearly intact, with words such as fornicator in English that come directly from this word. So, if you wanted to have a taste of their services, the price ranged from 2 to 20 asses. It varied depending on the quality and the type of services provided. An inscription from an inn priced the services of a woman at 8 asses, which seems like a reasonable price considering the extra for the convenience of not having to leave the premises of the Colosseum. Alright, let's do some calculations. We have our entry ticket, we have our food, the denarius we spent on our bet, we have our wine, our souvenirs, our halftime entertainment at the Fornicaria. How much did all of that cost us? And to put it in perspective, how much would that kind of money square up in relation to the average salary of a Roman? With the free entry ticket, the 12 asses for the food and drink, the 2 for the souvenir lamp, 8 for the Fornicaria services, and 16 asses for the denarius we bet, we come to a total of 38 asses, or 2 silver denarii and 1 brass sestertius. And let me tell you, that is a surprisingly expensive tab. Since we're visiting the Colosseum during the reign of Domitian, let's use the salary of a legionary of this time as a reference. It wasn't a particularly good salary, but it allowed one to take care of himself. Their annual pay was 300 denarii, which equates to 4,800 asses. In reality, they earned more than that. I mean, the emperor constantly gave them cash bonuses to gain their loyalty, and the spoils of war one could get could supplement their income, but I'll just use the base salary as a simpler reference. Let's keep in mind a good part of that salary was deducted from their pay for food, clothing, maintenance of their equipment, and as much as 50% of their pay could be gone in that, leaving a low-ranking legionary with a total of 150 denarii, or 2,400 asses of disposable income per year. That's around 6.5 asses per day, meaning nearly 6 days of his disposable income was needed in order to enjoy a single day of gambling, drinking, eating, and watching the games. That's a lot. It's true that this tab could have been substantially reduced if you decided to be more frugal. Bring your own food from home, abstain from buying wine, from gambling, and from having fun at the brothel during the intermission. It could have been as affordable as just your typical expenses to feed yourself on a normal day. After all, the games were paid by the emperor and the aristocracy. However, this experiment shows just how incredibly complex the Roman economy was. If there were so many different ways to buy food, buy services, spend money in something relatively simple as the entertainment economy that revolved around the Colosseum, imagine how complex, how much capital was involved in the truly important systems the Romans had in place, like the logistics systems for their armies or their major trade routes to places like Africa or India. No wonder there are still so many Roman coins today. The level of sophistication of the Roman economy was really something not seen again in Europe until the early modern period, and the number of coins needed to make these systems work must have been staggering. After the games were over for the day, it would probably be around the late hours of the afternoon, with just a few hours before sunset. It would be wise to just take our time machine back to our present day. You wouldn't want to find yourself walking down the streets of Rome at night. It was a dangerous place. And even if you got a room at an inn, it wouldn't be one of the safest places either. So, to answer our question, how much money should we take with us in our time machine? I mean, as much as I would like to bring a fistful of silver denarii and have an absolute blast of a day, it would probably attract too much unwanted attention. Ancient Rome had something akin to a police force patrolling the streets, but the city had a serious problem with petty crime, just like modern Rome has today. And as we've seen, 2 denarii and a sestertius was enough to have a great day. I would personally round it up to a full 3 denarii. Wouldn't call too much attention, and it would still allow me to enjoy most of what the Colosseum had to offer. And how about you? How much money would you take for a day in ancient Rome? More? Less? Would you prefer to go to the Circus Maximus instead? Let us know in the comment section down below. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, leave a like and consider subscribing. And I'll see you soon.